right, so such is the joy of Torah study. After a few hours of learning, I was convinced that I was preparing a text study on the themes of exile and redemption. But after a few more hours of learning, this somehow became a text study on sheep. So you're welcome, and I'm sorry. And hopefully there's a deeper message in here as well. I want to admit that the kind of thesis that I came up with is not one that I've seen anyone else express, which in the world of Torah study is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. I do want to say thank you to Rabbi Dr. Candice Levy and Rabbi Silver for indulging me with many hours of conversation yesterday as we were trying to figure out, I was trying to figure out, they were trying to help me get back on board. But, listen, you will be the judge. After I share this text study, you'll tell me afterwards if you buy it or not. And you're allowed to not buy it. A few years ago, it was also the Shabbos in between Christmas and New Year's, and I also somehow that week had the zechut, the privilege of standing in front of you and being the darshan, giving the sermon. And I remember I try to save the sort of quirkiest, funkiest, most far out Torah theories for this particular Shabbat. And I remember I presented one of those a few years ago, and afterwards I went up to one of my teachers, who's not in the room right now, but I went up to one of my teachers and I said, "So, do you buy it?" And he said, "No." But it was a good drash still. So maybe we'll land somewhere in there. Okay, so let me present the thesis. The thesis is that within the master narrative of the Exodus story is a sub-story exploring the dynamics of preserving minority culture in a larger and potentially hostile environment. And that sub-story is told through the mechanism of sheep. So, let's ruminate on this together. Okay, this is off to a good start. All right, so let me set the stage. Let me set the stage for the first text that we're going to look at. Joseph has sent, this is actually right where we ended our first triennial Torah reading today. Joseph has sent for his brothers and father to come to Egypt, where he intends to settle them. But since Pharaoh ultimately has the final call in allocating land in Egypt, Joseph is strategizing how to ensure the meeting between his family and his boss goes well. All right, so this first text is Joseph prepping his brothers for how to navigate the conversation with Pharaoh. And you'll notice right off the bat, this really prepping is the right word, because what Joseph is telling the brothers what he is first going to say to Pharaoh, and then what he anticipates Pharaoh will say to them, and then what they should say back to him. He's trying to script, right, the whole conversation. So here we are, the first text. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell the news to Pharaoh and say to him, 'My brothers and my father's household who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds, they have always been breeders of livestock, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds and all that is theirs.' So when Pharaoh summons you and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you shall answer, 'Your servants have been breeders of livestock from the start until now, both we and our fathers, so that you may stay in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians.'" All right, we're going to make this participatory, all right? So what jumps out to you about Joseph's advice about how the brothers should answer the question about their occupation? What jumps out to you about what Joseph is telling the brothers they should say in this anticipated dialogue between the brothers and Pharaoh? Yes, nice and loud. Good. Good. Leave out the parts that you are shepherd. And so based on that, building on that, what do you think Joseph is trying to engineer or mastermind here? Right? Joseph is the puppeteer, right? What is he trying to engineer? Any theories? Okay, he wants to manage the relationships so his family gets off to a good start and can ultimately integrate, right? Integrate into Egyptian society. Surah? Okay, good. So maybe Sir is saying this is a geographic play, right? Goshen is a particular region in Egypt far away from the capital city, which is known for being hospitable to cattle, right? It's good grazing land. So maybe what Joseph is trying to do is sort of play on the Egyptian prejudice against shepherds as a way to keep his family distant from the center of power in Egypt. Let's take one more. Okay, good. Right? I think it's important that there is a distinction here, right, between a shepherd and a breeder of livestock. Obviously, they both handle cattle, but there may be different ranks within this profession. Right? And Joseph senses that a breeder of livestock will be less offensive to the Egyptians or to Pharaoh, whereas a shepherd is fully offensive, right? Look at this last line. For all shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians. Just look, I think I gave you two of many commentaries that try to understand what is happening in this description of the Egyptians' opinion of shepherds. We have Rashi, who says very clearly, because sheep are regarded by them as deities. Right? So shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians because those who care for sheep are somehow lording themselves over an Egyptian deity. There's an improper relationship between the animal, which represents an Egyptian god, and the human relationship to that god. Versus Ibn Ezra, who says that this verse shows that in those days the Egyptians did not eat meat, and they did not permit anyone to slaughter sheep. And then, I love this, living in 11th century Spain, Ibn Ezra says, the inhabitants of India follow the same practice nowadays. The Egyptians consider shepherds an abomination because they drank milk. So we don't know the exact reason. Perhaps the Egyptians feel this way about shepherds because sheep are an Egyptian deity. Perhaps they feel this way about shepherds because they have some sort of cultural taboo or prohibition against eating meat or drinking sheep's milk. Nonetheless, Joseph knows that this is how Pharaoh and the Egyptians, or at least the Egyptians, feel about shepherds, and is steering his brothers to leave out that part and only emphasize that they are breeders of livestock. All right. What do you have next on your sheet? I don't have... Ramban. Okay. All right. So... Ramban is going to pick up on the suggested language that the brothers use, that Joseph is suggesting that the brothers use when they speak to Pharaoh. The men are shepherds. They have always been breeders of livestock. That is, they are shepherds, but not shepherds who tend the flocks of others. Even for their own flocks, they have servants and employees who take care of their animals. It is just that their wealth is in the livestock. And so this connects to the answer we heard over here, that perhaps there's a social and economic hierarchy between these two professions, and it would be more palatable for the brothers to present themselves as breeders of livestock, because that's how they derive their wealth, right? They're not actually out there in the fields grazing with the sheep. They're the owners, and this is just how they make their living. So Joseph is trying to make his family more palatable to Pharaoh and the Egyptians, but this should stink a little bit. That was not an intentional pun there, right? This should stink a little bit, like he's playing into a kind of xenophobia that might even sound a little bit familiar to what we hear in modern day parlance, right? They're the good kind of immigrant, right? They don't engage in abhorrent practices. They aren't so different from me and you. And oh, by the way, they're wealthy. They're not going to be a drain on the economy here in Egypt. They're breeders of livestock. They make their own money. Don't worry about them. You should settle them. Settle them. They'll be good residents of your land, Pharaoh. Okay, all of that is what Joseph says he's going to first say to Pharaoh, and then what he suggests the brothers should say in response to Pharaoh when Pharaoh asks, what is your occupation? Let's move to the next text, which I think is Genesis 47:1. Yes? Okay. Then Joseph came and reported to Pharaoh, saying, my father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that is theirs, have come from the land of Canaan, thank you, and are now in the region of Goshen. All right, let's stop. Did Joseph say to Pharaoh what he said he was going to say to Pharaoh? No. What does he leave out? Both, right? He leaves out essentially everything about their occupation, right? He doesn't mention that they're shepherds. He doesn't mention that they're breeders of livestock. All he says is that they've come with everything they got, right? They've come with all their flocks and herds and all that is theirs, and they're now in the region of Goshen. So the Bechor Shor, 12th century commentator from France, picks up on this language and says, well, why is it that this is what Joseph, in fact, chooses to say to Pharaoh? Joseph is trying to convey that they don't intend to return, but to settle in your land and serve you. All right. So Joseph does not say to Pharaoh what he told the brothers he'd say. Most notably, he doesn't say that they're shepherds. All he says is that they're bringing their flocks and all of their possessions. How do we understand this behavior from Joseph? What do you all think? What do you know? What, based on what you know about Joseph, either supports or pushes back on what we're seeing from Joseph's behavior right now? Okay, he's trying to impute value into their arrival. Good. Joseph is a kind of a master of disguise, right? And he has made his way up to the second highest position of power in Egypt by knowing when to diminish parts of his identity and when to emphasize other parts of his identity. And most notably, it is his Egyptian identity that he is maybe in this moment emphasizing or using to his advantage or to his brother's advantage, or at least that's how it comes off. And I think, look, this makes sense when we consider the arc of Joseph's story. How are we first introduced to Joseph? We get 2 verses back when Joseph is born, in which this is not on your page, in which just his name is reported. But the first real introduction to Joseph, the character, happens in Genesis 37, right at the very beginning of the Joseph story. Yosef ben 17 shana haya ro'eh et echav batzon. Yosef, 17 years old, was a shepherd of sheep along with his brothers. That's how we are introduced to Joseph, as a shepherd of sheep, as the profession which is abhorrent to the Egyptians. But who is he now? He's second in command, dressed in royal Egyptian clothing, who rides around on the most Egyptian of animals, the chariot, who has an Egyptian name, Sofnat Paneach, who married an Egyptian princess, who named his firstborn Menashe, meaning, God has made me forget completely my hardship and my parental home. There is an argument to be made, I believe, that Joseph's philosophy of survival is complete assimilation. And perhaps this is his end game for his brothers as well. Right? Don't tell them that you are shepherds. That'll make it harder to integrate into Egyptian society because Egyptians think that shepherds are abhorrent. And I'm going to suggest to Pharaoh that you're here to stay, and not only to stay, but to serve you. Joseph is presenting himself, I want to suggest in this moment, as the primary advocate for a full assimilation, in which he even asks his brothers to negate whatever previous identity they might have had in the service of joining Egyptian society fully. But listen to how the brothers answer Pharaoh's question. I think we're now on, I have the text here. We're now on the next text, so we're on the top of page 2. And carefully selecting a few of his brothers, he presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" They answered Pharaoh, "We, your servants, are shepherds, as were also our fathers. We have come," they told Pharaoh, "to sojourn in this land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, the famine being severe in the land of Canaan. Pray then, let your servants stay in the region of Goshen." All right, so what do the brothers do? That's right. The opposite of what they were instructed, they completely disregard Joseph's advice, saying the very thing that Joseph cautioned them from saying. We're shepherds, right? And emphasizing the temporariness of their journey. And in case you missed that, look at Chizkuni, another 13th century French commentator, who picks up on the lagur be'aretz banu, to sojourn in the land. We came here only for a temporary stay until the famine passed, and not to permanently reside. Right? So the brothers are saying to Pharaoh, we are shepherds. We know that makes you think that we are abhorrent. That is who we are nonetheless. That is where we come from. That's our father's profession. That's our profession. And we're only here until the famine passes. We're not setting up shop here in Egypt. We belong to the land of Israel. Why do you think the brothers answer this way? Let's take a few. Jonathan.
I think this is sort of foreshadowing the people of Israel continuously rejecting God's advice and Moses' advice. An explanation for why, the people in Babylon are in exile. Essentially, it's your fault. You never listened, and you don't do anything.
Interesting. So yes, so this is certainly I'm not sure if it's the first, but it's one of many examples of the people not following the advice of whomever is in power, right? Whether that's Moses or God. But here, I think we can sort of question, or at least we feel the tension of whether it was good advice that Joseph gave them, right? It sort of depends what their goal is. If Joseph's advice is aimed at a kind of a full assimilation for his brothers, their resisting of that advice is maybe not just evidence of chutzpahdik behavior, but evidence of resistance of the goal itself. Danielle?
They also just experienced like a narrative of lying and manipulation that got them in a really sticky situation. They just have come clean and had this big moment with Joseph where they're reunited, and so I think part of them is like, we're not lying again. We saw what that got us. We lost you. We thought we were dead. We finally reunited. We're now going to be on the sort of straight and narrow path of righteousness from here on.
Good, right? These brothers know too well the cost of duplicitous behavior, right? 22 years, their brother was in Egypt, and they lived with the fact that they were the ones who were responsible for him ultimately ending up there. They're the ones who were responsible for telling their father that their brother had been ripped to shreds by a beast. Finally, Joseph and the brothers are reunited. They've come clean. There's this chance to start over again. And the brothers are looking at Joseph. You want us to do what? You want us to lie? We're committed to a different path. Yes?
I also wonder, the calculation of what would be the least threatening to Pharaoh? Was it least threatening to say, you got new servants, or we're only here, don't worry about it?
Right. So I think, I mean, that's an open question. I think there's a debate here, right? Is Pharaoh looking for an answer that produces more subjects in his kingdom? Joseph seems... the question of motivation is tricky to pull apart here, right? Is it Joseph's motivation that the brothers assimilate like him for his own sake? Or does Joseph want them to assimilate because Joseph certainly knows Pharaoh and the inner workings of the palace? He thinks that's what will be the most palatable answer for Pharaoh? Or is it the opposite, right? That the brothers... want to be sort of soft in their approach of Egypt. We're not here to stay. We're just here for a few years until the famine passes. I think it's unclear. But I think what I'd like to suggest is that this is a disagreement not just about a particular profession or where in the pecking order the brothers are in that profession. This is ultimately a disagreement between Joseph and the brothers about identity, about assimilation, about homeland. Are we here to stay, or is this temporary? If we are here to stay, can we be fully ourselves in this place, or do we have to give up our distinctiveness, our core stories, our profession, our identity in order to survive or maybe even thrive in this strange land? Wendy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So certainly, right? Certainly, this could be more evidence of sibling disagreement, sibling rivalry, disunity among siblings. As you said, there's no shortage of that in Sefer Bereshit, in the book of Genesis. But I think there's something more here. This isn't just siblings, wrestling with each other. This is an identity disagreement, right? This is a philosophical disagreement about who we are and what happens when we find ourselves in a place that might ask us to compromise the fullness of our identity, right? Joseph is in the camp of, look at me. Look at who I've become by fully assimilating into Egyptian culture. The brothers, not so sure. All right, I'm gonna move us just for the sake of time, but this is good. This is good. We can talk over lunch. So despite the resistance of the brothers' answer to Pharaoh, the truth is they don't maintain this attitude. Right? Look at the next text. This is at the end of this week's Parsha. Thus Israel settled in the country of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired holdings in it and were fertile and increased greatly. Okay, so fine. They settle in Egypt, but Genesis 47:27, what we just read, is still in the context of the famine. Right? So you could say they're just riding it out. But 17 years later, they're still there. When Jacob dies, it's time for Joseph to make good on the oath that he made to his father to bury him in his homeland. Perhaps the brothers were staying in Egypt longer than they desired out of respect for their father. They didn't want to abandon him there, or they didn't want to split up the family once again. But Jacob has now died, and it would seem that this is the logical moment for the brothers to return to Canaan. They could accompany the funeral procession to Hebron, where Jacob will be buried, and then stay there for good, shepherds in their homeland. But what happens? Genesis 50, 7 through 9, and verse 14. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the officials of Pharaoh, the senior members of his court, and all of Egypt's dignitaries, together with all of Joseph's household, his brothers and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the region of Goshen. Chariots too and horsemen went up with him. It was a very large troop. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. I think I want to just admit, this is where my theory gets weird. So this is where I might lose you. But what do we make of the fact, or the symbolism of the fact, that on the trip that could have returned them to their homeland, to reside there permanently once more, what do they leave behind in Egypt? Yeah, their children, whatever. But what do they leave behind? Their sheep. Their sheep. What do you make of that? What's the symbolism of that? Lorelai. They got comfortable, like a lot of diaspora Jews. Miriam. So that's right. So they continue to have sheep, but what we don't know is if they are breeders of livestock or shepherds. Although maybe the fact that they left their sheep behind implies that they're breeders of livestock and not shepherds. I mean, would a shepherd really separate from their sheep for such a trip like this? Other theories? Jairo? Right. So good. So there could be part of the dynamic at this point is that even though we are still, we're still in the era of good relations between Pharaoh and the Israelites. Maybe there's the beginning of maybe this is a hint that Pharaoh certainly did want them to stay. Right? He wanted them to stay and to become servants of Pharaoh. He doesn't really want them to leave. Right? He's happy that they've resided there with some permanence, and this being maybe the chance for them to go. Pharaoh's going to ensure that they don't go. But Pharaoh's motivations are less interesting to me at this point. More interesting is what the brothers are thinking. And I want to suggest that what the brothers are thinking is that they have no intention to go back to Canaan. They're happy to be in Egypt, and they're going to leave their sheep there, and then they're going to go back to their sheep once they've buried their father. Did you want to say something? Yeah. Okay, good. I think that you said it perfectly. The marker of their identity is the thing that they leave behind. So, on some level, I want to suggest that they're increasingly estranged from the identity, the core story that made them who they were, that made them say intentionally to Pharaoh, no, we're those people that you think are abhorrent. And this is some evidence of growing comfort and even willingness to set up shop permanently and in Egypt. Once they return to Egypt, they become trapped by Egypt. Just one generation later, a pharaoh who would arise who did not know Joseph, who would subjugate the Israelites to a brutal enslavement. So now, I want to suggest that the redemption arc of the Israelites is intertwined with their re-embracing of the distinctive identity that initially made them at odds with a permanent stay in Egypt. The redemption from slavery is mirrored in this kind of sub-story by their return to the voice of the brothers when they first responded to Pharaoh, what is your occupation? We are shepherds. And we are also, as were also our fathers, our time here in Egypt is temporary. So I'm going to show you through 3 different texts how they re-embrace this identity. The first, Exodus 3, 1 through 2. Moses, the Egyptian prince, half Israelite, half Egyptian, grew up in the palace, steps out from the palace, sees the Egyptian taskmaster brutally beating the Israelite slave. Moses strikes down the taskmaster, realizes what he's done, realizes that he could be in deep trouble, and he flees into the wilderness. And what happens there? Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. A messenger of God appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. How does Moses recover his Israelite identity? By becoming a shepherd, right? And this is the moment that then launches Moshe into the redemption story, back to Egypt to liberate his people from slavery. Number 2. I'm going to move quickly through these so that you don't think too deeply about them. Number 2. So this is a parallel of the scene where Joseph and his brothers are willing to leave Egypt with their flock. But this happens right after the plague of darkness. Exodus 10. Pharaoh then summoned Moses and said, "Go worship God. Only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind. Even your dependents," Dev Browse, "may go with you." But Moses said, "Our own livestock too shall go along with us. Not a hoof shall remain behind, for we must select from it for the worship of our God." Right? You see how this is the parallel? When they went to go bury Jacob, their father, what do they leave behind? They leave their flock behind. But here, where Pharaoh is saying, "Go, finally, 9 plagues, get out of here, just leave your sheep behind," Moses says, "No, we're not leaving our sheep behind. We're only leaving if our flock can come with us, because that's who we are. That's how we practice our religion. This is core to our identity." Number 3, in the lead up to the 10th plague, each family, as you know, is instructed to take a lamb, sacrifice it, eat it, spread its blood on the doorpost as the catalyst for the ultimate redemption. And in the future, this is the second part of the text, when you observe this annual rite, and your children ask you what is its meaning, "Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem," which you might recognize from the Haggadah, you shall say, "It is the Passover sacrifice to God, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses." Those assembled then bowed low in homage. The ultimate redemption of the Israelite people happens through the worship of God, through the sacrifice of a lamb. And then, to commemorate that moment, every year, as an identity-inculcating reminder ritual, when the children of next generations ask, "Well, what is this? What is this all about?" This is what we did. We are shepherds. Our fathers were shepherds. When it was time to leave Egypt, we sacrificed a sheep. We ate of it as a community, one household at a time. We spread its blood on the doorpost. God passed over our houses. God saved our house. And here, I think it's not just our literal house, right? It is our culture, our society, our peoplehood. It's good, because I don't really have an ending beyond that. Other than to say, and I see the hands, we'll just talk over lunch because I've taken us into Musaf time. There's a polemic here, right? There's a dialogue internal to the Torah without, I want to say, a very sort of, with an answer which is in some ways too simplified to apply fully in the context of modern life. But the Torah is suggesting that when we find ourselves living in a culture in which our practices are the minority practices, the answer is not to fully assimilate into the broader culture. You have to find ways to maintain your core practices, your core stories, to be able to look at your children and say, "We are shepherds and our fathers were shepherds." Shabbat Shalom.